Now in this video, we're going to focus specifically on how to animate these lines in this graph. But before we do that, it's really important to focus on how this graph was constructed. So to do that, I want to make sure to double click the 0, 1 line stroke composition, then select layer 1 and press Command E on the Mac or Control E on Windows to edit the original file. If we look in the layers panel here in the lower right corner, click on the selection target to make sure the chart is selected. If you don't see the layers panel down here, you want to make sure you're in the Essentials workspace, and you may need to reset your workspace so you can actually come down here and enable your layers. Okay, so with the chart layer selected with its target, we can go over to the toolbar here and just double click on the line graph tool, and that'll open up my graph type options. I want you to pay attention to the options down here at the bottom in the options section. If we wanted squares to appear at each different data point, we can enable mark data points. We can leave that disabled for now. The most important thing to understand is this draw filled lines option. Notice this line is actually a path that just has a stroke on it. If we enable draw filled lines, that'll change that into a filled shape, just like a rectangle or an ellipse or anything else. So that's how this is built. I'll click cancel. And if I open up my chart options here, you can see it's all grouped under one graph option. This way I can always go back and edit the graph settings if I have different data points I need to map out. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this because I want you to go back into After Effects and double click on the 0, 2 lines fill comp. In here, go ahead and select layer 1 and then press Command E or Control E on Windows to edit the original file. Notice here in my layers panel, I have my graph, but I had selected the graph and made sure to select its target, and I went up under Object and told it to ungroup. That gave me the ability to select individual text layers and create outlines from those text elements. That way, when we convert this, none of the text will actually disappear. Now, since all these layers still exist within the hierarchy of this overarching graph layer, it'll appear as though it's exactly the same in After Effects, but it's really not. So we can go ahead and just close this, and we don't have to save any changes, and jump back into After Effects. Once you're back in After Effects, let's start with the 0, 1 line stroke comp. I'm just going to click on that tab here in the timeline, and then select layer 1, and go up under Layer, and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Notice the text disappeared. Like I said, that's just because I didn't ungroup that chart and then create outlines for each text layer. So let's open up layer 1 and open up its contents, and you can see I have several different groups that actually make up this whole graph. And if you click on each group, you'll see a bounding box around each section. So notice the line was divided up by section. So I need to group all 4 of these elements into one group. To do this relatively quickly, I'm going to click on the word contents, go over to my Add button, and I'll click on the flyout and add a group. Now the group's been added all the way to the bottom. To make things easier to see, I'm going to press the Accent Grav key in the upper left corner of the keyboard. So with group 24 selected, press return, and I'll just call this black line. And we'll move this to the top of the hierarchy by clicking on the words black line and dragging up just underneath the contents till we can see this black dark line. That way, when I let go, it's at the top of the hierarchy. So now I can click on group 1 and shift click on group 4 and drag and drop those groups right into the black line group. Now there's one last thing to do. Select the words black line and go over to the add option here, and we want to add a trim paths function. Notice when we do that, I can see the insides of my black line groups, and the trim paths were added all the way at the bottom here. Now press the tilde key on your keyboard so we can see the whole interface again. And if I scroll down so I can see my trim paths and open up its options, notice as I scrub the end parameter here, each individual section is still being respected. I need to change the trim multiple shapes option from simultaneously to individually. So now as I scrub the end parameter here, you can see it moves from right to left. Let's scrub the start parameter here. So let's set a start parameter of 100. We'll move our current time indicator to frame 0 and just add a keyframe, and then we can move down maybe to 1 second and change that start setting to 0. So now it's going to draw from the left side of the screen onto the right. Pretty easy just using the trim pass function. Let's click on the 02 Lines Fill tab to bring that to the front. Select Layer 1, go up under Layer, and choose Create Shapes from Vector Layer. Notice all my text stayed in here, but if I open up my Shape Layer options under Contents, I have many more groups, okay? Now I want to animate that same line, and I've already gone through the process of figuring out which group it was. It happened to be group 41. So if I click on group 41, I can just press return and we can call this black line. If we open up the black line options, notice it just has a path and that path is filled. So if I select black line and want to add a trim pass function, it's not going to function properly. What I need to do is actually mask one layer with another object. To do that, I'm going to click on the word black line here, and I'll just click on it and then drag up, holding it down with my mouse until I get just to where my contents are and just below so I can see that black line. So now that it's at the top of the layer hierarchy, I can just more clearly see some of my options. I could go over to the add function here and try and do my trim pass, but like I said, that won't work. So what I need to do is select my fill. Okay, if I toggle its visibility off and on, you can see the layer will appear or disappear. If I open my fill options here, you can just see that it is just filled with a color. What I want to do is add yet another shape in here. So with fill 1 selected, I'm going to go over to the add button and I'll click on that flyout and I want to add a rectangle. And since I had fill 1 selected, it automatically put the rectangle right above my fill. So if I open up my rectangle options, I can unlink the proportions lock and drag on the X parameter. And if you hold down Shift as you drag, it'll scale more quickly. So you want it to be a little larger than the line itself. And then we'll do the same thing for the Y parameter. I'm going to hold down Shift and drag. And so those settings, 1050 and 390, that works. But notice I'm getting the inverse of what I'm looking for. What I need to do is go back up to the Add button here, and I need to add a function called Merge Paths. Merge Paths looks at all the layers above, and then if you open its options, you can adjust a mode. So here, I want it to actually paint anything that's intersected. So when I go to intersect, now it is an intersection of this original path with the rectangle path. So if I open my rectangle path options now, I can go ahead and actually scrub on the X parameter, and notice as I scrub left and right, it's actually going to control the reveal of the line. So I could keyframe this just like the other layer. So I know it seems a little complicated, but the big thing to understand is once you've actually created your graph inside of Illustrator, you have a little bit more control over how that data is interpreted inside of After Effects. Just keep that in mind when you're deciding to ungroup your graph elements and how you want to put them on their own separate layers in Illustrator before you ever bring them into After Effects. And of course, you could just leave it all set up in its individual group and convert to a shape layer. Just understand when you do that, sometimes the text might disappear.